Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, welcome back, everyone, or welcome if this is your first time here in this series. Even if you were not here last week, we will bring you up to speed. It's not a direct continuation, although it definitely is a continuation of the topic. And we're talking about how to view Gemara's quotes from our sage, Chazal, in the Talmud, etc., that don't seem to make much sense. And sometimes it could seem like it's an exaggeration. It could seem like a story happened that's impossible to have happened. There's a lot of different ways that we can have such a passage that's hard to understand. And we're going through several methods in how to look at these. And while we're doing it along this journey, we're going to be giving you a taste of many such quotes and types of Gemara. So, sometimes you might come to me with a difficult Talmud and say, oh, Rabbi, how do you explain this one? Today, you don't have to. I'm going to bring it all to you. I'm going to throw it all out on the table, the most difficult Gemaras that I've come across, and we're going to talk about different perspectives. So let's recap in 60 seconds the main point of what we talked about last week, and that was the perspective of the Rambam. The Rambam, when he talks about how people generally understand Aggadata, and again, I'm using the word Aggadata because it's easy to just choose one word, but included in this word Aggadata means essentially any quote from our sages that's in the Talmud or quoted from Chazal that is not a halachic text. It's not there to teach you Jewish law. There's something else there. It's a story, it's a riddle. It could seem impossible, but I'm just using the term Aggadata. So the Rambam says, Maimonides says, there's three types of people. There are three camps of people and how they view this. The first one he calls the ignorants. Who are the ignorants? The ignorants are those who insist that since Chazal were brilliant scholars, everything they say is true and literal. And if we don't understand it, it's because we're small-minded, we don't have such advanced brains as they did back in their generation, and we're not smarter than them. So we just need to take it literally. The Rambam calls that ignorant. The Rambam has a second category we talk about, and he calls those the cynics. Right? He has very colorful language for everybody here. So what are the cynics? The cynics say that we need to take Chazal literally, and since they said things that are impossible, it must be that this is a fraud, that the Chazal were a fake, that the Talmud is a fake. They ridicule the Talmud because they say, hey, listen, these are big rabbis, so it must be true what they're saying, meaning not true. It must be literal what they're saying. And since it's literal and impossible, it must be that they're making it up or that there's no, and they discredit the quote entirely, or worse, they discredit the rabbis entirely, and they roll their eyes and they move on. And the third camp is the proper perspective, and that is those who take Chazal seriously, but not literally. Now, of course, that needs a lot of explaining because, and it needs to be broken down into more details. But the general category is we take everything Chazal says seriously because we recognize the significance of who they were and what they stood for, and that they cannot be discredited. But at the same time, we need to understand with our rational brains how to understand these difficult Aggadata passages. And what I didn't quote last week, I saw that the Rambam, he writes this in his introduction to his commentary on Mishnayos in the Masechta of Sanhedrin, Perek Chelek, which has a lot of these types of Gemaras. And he says, if you're from the first two camps, do yourself a favor and do not read my commentary, because it's just going to stress you out. If you're here to view the rabbis in the ignorant way or the cynical way, I encourage you to close the book and walk away, because what I'm going to say is just going to cause you aggravation. But if you're ready to come with an open mind, you're ready to join the third camp and recognize that Chazal need to be taken seriously, but not always literally. And now we could get into a discussion of how to break that down, when it's literal, when it's, and when it's not literal, and when it's meant to be taken at face value and when not. So now we could have a conversation. That was the short version of the recap of the Rambam's perspective. Move on to the perspective of his son. The Rambam had a son. He was also a Rishon and a very holy man, and his name was Reb Avraham. So he's known as Reb Avraham ben Harambam, the son of the Rambam, the son of Maimonides. And he also writes a long essay on Aggadata Gemaras, and in it he speaks out, what really people can see on their own, and that is that Aggadata Gemaras were not touched upon, and they were not analyzed and discussed and debated like so many other areas of the Talmud are. And he writes that his father, the Rambam, intended to write a thorough, authoritative book, or probably it would have been a set of books, going through and explaining each and every Aggadata Gemara. However, and he proves that by quoting his father in one of his writings, where he actually says, I am going to write a book on this. But we have no book on this from the Rambam, which means something came up, and for some reason the Rambam did not do what he committed to do, what he publicly wrote that he was going to do. He was going to write a book on this. He never wrote a book on this. So why did that happen? Rabbi Avram ben Rambam seems to say that the Rambam hesitated from doing that. And what he brings out from there is it's a scary topic to approach because it hasn't been approached by previous generations of scholars in the extent that many other halachic rulings were. So for us to come along and say, we've got this all figured out, takes a very brave man. So Rabbi Avram ben Rambam says, I'm going to attempt to bring some clarity on this matter, even though it's something that so many rabbis were scared to do. So why is it important to do that? And really, why am I doing it? Why am I having a series on Aggadata if it's not talked about so much, pales in comparison to other topics? Why is Menashe Or coming in 2021 and having a 3-part series as if I am going to tell you how to figure out a complex topic that has been shied away from so many people a billion times greater than me? So I'll tell you why. And Rabbi Avram ben Rambam says why. Because we need to have at least an approach in our mind so that when we come across a Gemara, a Talmud, that's baffling, how do we walk away from that? Do we walk away rolling our eyes at our sages, or do we walk away with faith that there is a clear and thorough explanation for every single word that's written in the Talmud, even though we don't understand it? And perhaps, rather than just say, there's a way to figure this out, but that's not for me to do, perhaps we can tell you some principles and how you can, on your own, understand the Gemara, or at the very least, know where to look to go search in the commentators and see who does talk about these kind of topics. And the other thing he says is, it's interesting, Rabbi Avram ben Aram says, I don't either want you to think that every time something happens that seems like a miracle, because it's impossible. How do you understand impossible? Either it didn't happen, or it happened and it was a miracle. I mean, there's not really any third alternative here. It either didn't happen or it did happen, and since it's clearly impossible, it's like the splitting of the sea. So the Rabbi Avram ben Rambam says, not everybody was Moses. So don't think that every single rabbi had the ability to perform unbelievable, incredible miracles. There may be another way of understanding the passageway. So basically, what I'm saying is after I went through a lot of Rabbi Avram's essay, I'm going to take out parts of it. This is not thorough. This is not thorough in that I'm not quoting to you every word that he wrote. It's way beyond the scope of this to do that, but I'm taking the main highlights from it. So if you have a quote, you have something from Chazal, there's 2 options. Either it's possible or it's not possible. Okay, how do you know if it's possible or not possible? Could it happen in 2021? We quoted this from the Rambam in last week as well, that we live on the same planet that the sages did thousands of years ago. So if you think it's possible, it's possible. If you know it's not possible, it's not possible. Very simple system. But now we move forward. So let's say it is possible to have happened. There are 4 types of passages in the Talmud. There's 4 categories, and we're going to go through each one, and we're going to give an example from pretty much each one, because I think it's important to do so, and then we'll move on to the ones that are not possible. So if it's possible, there's a few reasons why it might be written. Number 1, the most important and common is halacha. It's coming to teach you Jewish law. The tractate of Sukkah in the Talmud starts off talking about what size Sukkah is okay, and if it's too high, it's not a kosher Sukkah. That's very simple. We all need to understand what Jewish law is. The second thing it might be coming to teach us is ethics. It might be coming to teach us what is right and what is wrong, even if we're not taking a final halachic ruling out of that particular passage, but we can learn something from it. For example, there's very common in the Talmud, there'll be a difference of opinion, to say it mildly, between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. So Hillel and Shammai both had a yeshiva, and the house of Hillel and the house of Shammai constantly arguing in thousands and thousands of matters, to the extent that people refer to it almost as if the Torah split into 2, Hillel and Shammai. What was one of the most fundamental differences between Hillel and Shammai, and one of the reasons why we always follow the halachic ruling of Hillel? That is because they had a very fundamental philosophical difference in the way they ran their yeshiva. Beis Shammai felt that only the most worthy students should be admitted to be able to have the opportunity to study Torah in the yeshiva. And anybody who wasn't up to that level was not allowed entry into the Beit Midrash. Hillel and Beis Hillel had an opposing view, and they said, no, the Torah is for everyone, not just the VIPs. And they had an open door policy. Anybody who wanted to come learn Torah was able to come learn Torah. And the Talmud teaches us this. And the reason for that is to teach us ethics, to teach us what is the proper way to live life. And what we're going to take out of that is that Torah learning is something that is for every single Jew, regardless of their level of Jewish education, regardless of their knowledge, regardless of how smart they are. Torah learning is for everybody. So that's something ethical that we can take out of, and that's another type of Talmud. Another one would be what's called Hashkafa, Jewish philosophy. And I'll give you, there's a lot of examples of this, but I'll give you an example of Jewish philosophy and Jewish values from a Mishnah in Kedushin. The Mishnah talks about different types of professions and trades. And the Mishnah says that some are considered honest and some are considered more dishonest, and which ones are better to stick to and which ones not. So here's one example. Rabbi Meir says, a person should always teach la'olam yilamid adam as beno umanus nekia v'kala. A person should always teach his son a clean and light trade. The yispalel lemisha ha'aisher v'hanechasim shalai, and he should pray to the one whom wealth and possessions belong to, that's Hashem, that's our creator, that he should have success in his business. She'ein umanus, she'ein ba'aniyas va'asiris, because there is no profession that doesn't have both poverty and wealth. Rather, Ella hakol lefi zechusai, everything is in accordance to the merits of the person and the grace of God. So, and this is so true. You can make millions of dollars over the tiniest of objects. I have a friend of mine whose father is very wealthy, and he makes his money from selling one unique piece that goes into commercial printers. And when I say commercial, I mean newspaper printers. So I don't know how many newspapers there are in the country, but like relative to people who make, plastic cups, not so many. He sells one piece of the commercial printer, and he's quite wealthy because he managed to, make it in the market in the United States. And this tiny little thing is bringing him a tremendous amount of livelihood. Anything could be invested in, anything could be profitable. And at the same time, even the most valuable looking profession could make someone go broke. That's just the way of the world. So therefore, it's up to the person's merits and Hashem's grace for how much money somebody has. So Reb Meir says, very brilliant advice. If you're going to pick a profession, you may as well pick one that's easy and light, because regardless, the success of it has to do with you and it has to do with Hashem, but it doesn't necessarily have to do with the nature of the profession. So that's Reb Meir's advice. And then there's a few more opinions. We're not going to read the entire Mishnah. And then we have the opinion of Rabbi Nahoroi. Rabbi Nahoroi. What does he say? Meiniach ani kol umaniya sheba'olam. I abandon every trade in the world. I'll leave for others. The eini milamedas b'ni ela Torah. And I will only teach my son Torah. Why is that? He explains why. Because when it comes to Torah, you benefit from its reward in this world, but the principle remains for the world to come, all the reward that one gets from Torah study. And every other profession isn't. Every other profession, when a person gets to be sick, when a person gets to be old, when a person is injured or anything happens to him and he's no longer physically able to do work, harehu meis berav. He dies of starvation. So, I mean, I think that could be taken literally, that if a person has no more, can't make money anymore, he could actually die of starvation. But I think more than that, in a more figurative way, he has nothing left for him to do. Avla Torah enyakain. But when it comes to the Torah, that's not the way it works. Elam mishmarta mikol rab and arusai. It protects him from evil in his youth. It provides him with benefit and hope in his old age. And what does that mean? That means that when a person comes the day that he doesn't work anymore, whether he's retired or any other reason he's physically unable to work, what does he occupy his time with now? If he is a Torah scholar, Torah is the answer. By the way, even if he's not a Torah scholar, meaning that he didn't spend his whole life learning in yeshiva, if he still treats Torah learning as the most important thing in his life, so he'll have joy in his old age. And the older he gets, the more he's learning and the more knowledge he has in his mind, and the more excited he'll be. There's no living like an enthusiastic living of Torah learning. So this is not a halachic Mishnah. Okay, the Mishnah is not coming to say that Reb Neira says that one is only allowed to teach their son Torah and not a profession. That's not the purpose of the Mishnah, but rather to teach us this hashkafa, that when it comes to how we view our professions, we should realize what is temporary and what is eternal, and what's going to bring him more and more satisfaction and joy in his old age, and what is just going to leave him once he's unable to do the physical labor anymore. So that's a very powerful lesson for us to learn. And Rabbi Neira was on a level where he didn't care if his son was, educated for a profession or not. That doesn't have to be our level, but we can still take a takeaway message out of the story. And the fourth type of reason for a passage in the Talmud, this is like kind of in a category on its own, is to teach us the greatness of a Tana, of one of the rabbis. Sometimes it'll just say stories that show us how great our sages were. What is the purpose of this? I think we can speculate on our own what's the purpose of this. Maybe it could be that we should learn what we can aspire to be like. Maybe it should be that we should take their words seriously because we see stories of how great they are. It'll make a difference in what happens when we come across something we don't understand. Do we shrug it off, or do we say, whoa, who are we talking about right now? We're talking about this amazing, brilliant Tana who I saw this and this story about. It'll make a difference in how we approach something that we don't understand. Okay, now, Rabbi Avram ben Rambam continues to say that we need to ask ourselves a few questions. We have something that's possible, right? Again, we're splitting the two categories here into things that are possible to have happened and things that are not possible, and we're still in something that's possible. And I just told you 4 reasons why the Gemara teaches us ideas that are possible. There's a lesson that we need to learn. There's a halacha that we need to learn, etc. Okay, now, the term that's being used, is it literal or is it exaggerated? And I want to quote for you a Gemara in Tamid. Tamid is a really small Masechta that is often overlooked. And there's not even so much Talmud on it. It's mostly Mishnah. So the Mishnah in Tamid says that in the center of the altar, the Mizbeach in the temple, Tamid is about service in the temple. There were 300 measurements of ashes in the middle at all times, okay? Now, I don't know what the measurement is translated into, liters or pounds or any modern day thing. The Gemara makes it clear that this is a ridiculous amount of ashes. It's too much. It doesn't even make sense that there was enough room in the center of the altar for this unbelievable amount of ashes. So Rava says, that's the Talmud there, Rava says, this is an exaggeration. The Mishnah is just teaching us that there's a large quantity of ashes in the middle, and it's not meant to be taken literally that there's 300 measurements of ashes there. And then Reb Ami backs up Rava, and he says, yes, that is correct, Rava. It's an exaggeration. And I want to show you that exaggerations in all sections of the Torah, in the written Torah, in the prophets, in the Navi, as well as in the words of Chazal, our sages. If everyone could just mute themselves, you don't mind, there's a little background noise. So the Gemara then goes on to give an example of all three of them. So the first example is the one from the Torah. The Torah says in Devarim, "Hear Israel," I'm just going to read the English part of it. "You are passing over the Jordan this day to go in to dispossess nations greater and mightier than you." This is when the Jewish people were going to cross the Jordan into Israel to conquer the land of Israel. So the Torah is acknowledging that the nations currently residing in Israel are powerful people. You're going to go in and it's nations greater and mightier than you. Cities great and fortified up to the heaven. The cities were built up to the heaven. Says Rabbi Ami, do you think the city was built up to the heaven? That does not make any sense. That's impossible. How could a city be built up all the way to the sky? Rather, it's an exaggeration. And can anybody think of the English language version of this term of cities or buildings that are built up to the heaven? What do we say in English if you're talking about a super high building?
A skyscraper.
A skyscraper. Who said that? Caroline?
Yeah.
Caroline, how could you lie in public? Don't you know that no building scrapes the sky?
Well, yes, there we are. You see?
Okay, excellent. All right. So nobody else called you out for, exaggerating and lying here in a public forum. And that is because that's the term we use. Even in English, the word is skyscraper, and nobody's stressing out over the term skyscraper. So sometimes we use terms that are exaggerated. Okay, the next one is in the prophets, and that is, it says in relation to Shlomo HaMelech, King Solomon, all the people of the land came up to him, and and all the people of the land came up after him, and the people piped with pipes, which is like musical instruments, and rejoiced with great joy, so that the earth rent with the sound of them. Okay, the earth split open. So Reb Ami says, all this means is that the noise of the music of the celebration of people was very, very great, but it does not actually mean that it caused the earth to split open. Don't get bent out of shape about that term. What do you mean? The earth didn't split open. There's no historical reason to believe there was a mighty earthquake happening in that place. No, we don't have that. So what's the English term of that? What's the English use of an exaggerated word that
groundbreaking or earth shattering?
Yeah, I thought of earth shattering. I forgot about groundbreaking. Well, is groundbreaking used in that context? Yeah.
No, but it's
It is.
usually for something that's very novel. You know, if
Right.
it's very novel, it's groundbreaking, you know?
Right. Okay, excellent. And yeah, earth shattering is what I was thinking also. Earth shattering, next time you see somebody say earth shattering, you don't have to call them out for exaggerating and lying, because it's just a terminology that's commonly used in English. And so too in the Talmud, there are times, and the Gemara, there are times that we use such terminology. And the third one, which is, so we did the Torah and the prophets, the third one, there's a couple of examples of, but one of them is this very Mishnah in Tamid that we just mentioned, with all the ashes that are heaped up in the middle of the pile. That's a clear exaggeration, and it just means to say that there's a large amount of ashes. Okay, does that make sense? Any questions on that? Okay. Another question that we have to ask ourselves. So the first thing we asked ourselves is it possible to happen? And now we're going to ask ourselves another question. And that is, did we understand the quote properly? And this is so fundamental, because if anybody's ever learned or seen the approach of learning of in-depth analysis, the way that is commonly studied in yeshiva or in kollel, you can come to the Jacksonville kollel any morning from 9 to 12, and you'll see this type of learning. In-depth analysis. And what that means is we're going to take a passage, we're going to take a Gemara or a Mishnah or Code of Jewish Law, the Shulchan Aruch, whatever it's going to be, we're going to open it, we're going to read it, we're going to analyze it, we're going to question it, we're going to debate it. We're never going to take a word just at face value and then just run along on moving to the next one. We're going to dive into the topic. And the way to do that is, I guess, first and foremost, by reading it. You read the Rashi, the simple commentators, and you think about it. You talk, if you have a study partner, you talk to him about it, and then you hit the bookshelves. There's thousands and thousands of books of commentaries that are writing on the Talmud and on almost every fundamental book in Judaism. And they analyze bit by bit everything from the terminology of something, why the rabbi used this word and not a different word, why it was said in this context, did this contradict something else? I can go on and on and on. It takes a long time to finally take out of the topic the final bottom line of what is the walkaway message from this topic. This takes a lot of time to get to. So if that's the way of the Talmud, and for another conversation could be, why is that the way of the Talmud? Maybe because it gives us a strong connection to the Torah. The very process of discussing and analyzing is a process of speaking words of the Holy Torah closer to Hashem. There's a lot of reasoning behind why Torah has to be so complicated and why it just can't be one fat Wikipedia series. But regardless, let's take it for granted that that's the way the Talmud was written. Is there any reason that you should think that applies to only halachic text, but that doesn't apply to non-halachic text? Any reason you should think that this applies to 2,400 pages of the Talmud, but it doesn't apply to the other 300 that are stories, or the exaggerations, or the riddles, or the parts that we don't understand? There's no logical reason to say that. But yet, when we come across a story, we say, oh, it's a simple story. It's like a Dr. Seuss story, right? We just read it, and it's either we like it or we think it's silly and we move on. But that doesn't make sense. If the way the book was written and the way the Talmud was written requires this type of analysis, we should not skip over it when it comes to the stories that we don't understand. And it's a shame that many times we do. And that's the way of the world. And that's what a lot of people do, even in yeshiva. When I was in yeshiva, when we came across Aggadata Gemara, we did it quickly. If we find, we had some kind of excuse why we could skip it, we could skip it. But the truth is, there's no good reason to do that. And the reality is that there's plenty that could be learned out of it if we would just give it the same attention that we do every other page in the Talmud. So that's why it's important to analyze every text that's being read. And even if we do understand it, there's certainly and it makes sense. Okay, let's take these both for granted. Does it make sense? Yes, it makes sense. It's not impossibility. Do I understand it? Yes, I understand it. I'm not just flying through it. I put some time, I put some focus, and I understand it. Now, there's still another possibility. And that is that there is an encrypted message in this passage in Talmud. Yes, the simple understanding is true. Why is it true? If it's possible, it's probably true. So that means we can say that the story happened if there's nothing impossible about the story. But maybe there's a much deeper and more wise message that's hidden in this passage. And this is what I want to focus on a little bit today. And we're going to talk about, I'm going to read you some incredible Gemaras in the tractate of Bechoros, which are really unbelievable. And I just want to do a 30-second review just to speak out where we're holding here. Rabbi Avram ben Rambam says that we want to analyze every type of story we could come across and see which category it falls into. And we're going to ask ourselves a few questions. The first question is it possible for this to have happened? Today, we're talking about if it's possible. If we have time at the end, we'll get to the part of if it's not possible. If it is possible, there's one of four reasons why we're being taught this, which is interesting to know. There's halacha, there's ethics, there's Jewish philosophy, there's all kinds of takeaway messages that we could have from it, which is why it's important that we learn lots of Torah, because we have so much to learn from the Torah. And then we have to ask ourselves if we understood it properly, or if we're reading it in a childish, surface level way that we just think that we're just going to read it once and we're going to understand everything. And if we don't understand everything, then there's something wrong with the passage. No, we should give it the same respect that we give every other passage in the Talmud, even the ones that are more halachic. And then even if we do understand it and the story did happen, there's a possibility that there is an entire world hiding behind these texts that we never even thought of. And let's get into that. So, okay, before I read the Gemara, if anybody has any questions, comments, insights of any sort, feel free to pipe up and unmute yourself.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah, go for it.
So, you're saying like the reality is no different in our year than it was in like this times of the Gemara. Are you also talking about the times of the Torah, or you're talking about the times of the Gemara? Because I feel like at the times of the Torah, there was like a little bit of a different reality. Like there were giants and other kinds of things that like don't exist anymore.
Yeah, so the times of the Gemara, for the most part, we haven't come across or explored the world of whether there are impossibilities in the Torah, but that's not the point here. So I mean, there are miracles in the Torah, but here we're talking about stories that Chazal say that seem to be impossible. Yeah, perhaps there was a different reality at the time of the Torah.
No, like I'm saying if the Gemara was talking about giants, so at the time of the Torah, like that would be possible. And like in our life, it's not possible. So I'm just, you know what I'm saying? Like you're asking yourself, is this possible? But maybe it's not anymore, but maybe once upon a time it was. You know what I mean?
Yeah, so
I don't know.
To answer your question, I'm talking about the times of the Talmud, not the times of, not biblical times. Okay, anybody else have anything to add or ask?
Yeah, I just have a question actually. You know that when you divide it up, I love the way that you divide everything up. Thank you. Makes it easier it makes it more palatable. But if it's a halacha, isn't it important that there isn't really a hidden message? In other words, would we see less Aggadata if we were learning a halacha, because we need to understand that halacha as opposed to Hashkafa? So is there a time when, what you see is what you get because you need to know the laws?
Yes, thank you for bringing that up. I think it's important to speak that out. In my general recollection, I have not come across clear statements of halacha that have this kind of secret meaning behind it. So here with the secret meanings or the encrypted messages, it's generally an Aggadata, which will jump out at you as something that's very out of place and that clearly does not teach you halacha. So now we have to talk about like, what was the point here? So like, for example, if we just look at the four reasons for any Talmud, okay, the 4 reasons were the halacha, the ethics, the philosophy, or to teach you the greatness of the sages, right? So what happens if you come across Aggadata that doesn't fit into any of those? Boom, that's a red flag. Then bells should go off in your head that there must be an encrypted message here, because otherwise it doesn't fall into any of these reasons, and there's no reason for the Talmud to be teaching this to us. So these are on
Excellent.
yeah, these are with stories or things that seem impossible or exaggerated. Any other questions, comments? Okay, let us see this mind-blowing Gemara in Bechoros. So it's long, and I'm not going to get to all of it, but we have some time, so let's get into some of it. So this story is with Rabbi Yeshua. This is Bechoros. It's on Daf Ches Amid Beis 8b, and Rabbi Yeshua is talking to the wise men of Greece, of Athens, and the leaders of the Greek Empire. So Rabbi Yeshua is having a debate, and and I'm not going to get into all of the discussion, but basically there's a lot of back and forth over different concepts. And finally, the leader of the Greeks says to Rabbi Yeshua, how could you challenge the wise men of Greece if they are so knowledgeable in everything they say? Why do you think that you can contradict them and say that some scientific matter that they've discovered is not true according to the Torah, if they're so wise? And Rabbi Yeshua's response is a nice, strong, brilliant Jewish response. He says, we, the Jewish sages, are wiser than they are. We are wiser than the wise men of Greece and the greatest philosophers of the day. So he says, if that is the case, that you think you're better, I want you to go and debate the wisest group of philosophers in Greece. So Rabbi Yeshua says, no problem. How many people are in this exclusive club of Greek philosophers? And he says 60. So he says, okay, I'm going to go do it. Make me a boat. And I'm skipping over some details just because it's going to be too long. He says, make me a boat and I'll go travel and I'll go find them. He knows they're in a faraway place. So he listens, he makes him a boat, he builds him a boat, and he goes on his journey. He arrives in the city where these wise men are, but he doesn't know where they are because they hide away from civilization and nobody's going to be willing to give up their location. He goes to a butcher shop and he finds a man skinning an animal. The butcher is skinning an animal, and Rabbi Yeshua says, is your head for sale? So the butcher naturally assumes that he wants to buy the head of the animal that he's skinning. So he says, yep. How much? Half a zuz. Rabbi Yeshua says, no problem. The butcher gave him the head of the animal, and Rabbi Yeshua said to the butcher, I didn't ask for the head of an animal. That's not what I ordered. You messed up my order. I asked for your head. I said, how much for your head? So the butcher is like very taken aback. He didn't realize that he agreed to give Rabbi Yeshua his own head. So now he's in a pickle here. So Rabbi Yeshua says, if you want me to release you and let you go away unharmed, you need to show me the entranceway to the secret club of Greek philosophers. The butcher hesitates because he's scared that if they catch him giving away their location, they're going to kill him. Rabbi Yeshua says, take a bundle of reeds, let's call it like bamboo, a pile of bamboo, and walk down the market as if you're just a regular laborer. And when you're passing the entranceway to where this cave is, the secret place, adjust your bamboo, like put down the pile and readjust it and put it back on your shoulder. And that will be an indication to me that that's where the entranceway is, and they won't know that you gave away the location, and we'll both live happily ever after. So he agrees to do that. And so he does. And at the spot that he adjusted his bundle, what does Rabbi Yeshua see? He sees two he sees guards. There are bodyguards blocking the entranceway. And he realized that there were guards stationed outside the door of the cave and inside the door of the cave. Outside to prevent people from coming in, and inside to prevent people from coming out. So he had a brilliant idea of how he's going to get past the guards. He put on his shoes backwards and he walked to the entrance of the hideout. Then they picked up, I don't know, on their surveillance cameras, whatever it was, they realized that there are footprints in the dirt of somebody walking not into the cave, but out of the cave because he put on his shoes backwards. So they made the assumption that the bodyguard on the inside of the door let somebody out. They weren't allowed to let anybody out. Even the sages themselves were never allowed to escape. This is where they're locked up and this is where they're kept away from civilization. So they did that, and then the sage, those wise men, killed the inside bodyguards. And then Rabbi Yeshua walked out after reversing his shoes again, and now it looked like a pair of shoes went into the cave, so they came out and they killed the bodyguards on the outside. Okay, so this is how Rabbi Yeshua deceived the entire security system, and all of their own guards were killed by their heads, by their boss, and now he's free to walk inside. He walks inside, and one more part of the introduction to this before they start the conversation, he found young and old wise men. Okay, the young ones were in an upper chamber of seating, like I think it was in a semicircle, and the older ones were lower. So he wasn't sure what to do. If he offers greetings to the ones that are lower, which makes sense because they're older, the ones above would kill me because protocol would be to start with the top and then go low. And if vice versa, the ones below are going to kill him. So basically he has this great idea and he says, peace to you, meaning he just says, hello, everybody. He doesn't say, hello, bottom row, hello, top row. He knows that that's a trap. And therefore he navigates himself through this difficult, entranceway barriers. And now he's having a conversation with them. And basically the way it's understood is these wise men had no more pretext, like they no more reason to say, okay, we're going to kill you. They understood that he outwitted them in getting to that spot where he's able to have a conversation with them, and they are obligated to carry on a conversation. Okay, so he introduces himself and he says, I am a Jewish scholar and I want to receive wisdom from you. So they tell him, you're a scholar? We want to hear wisdom from you. Maybe you should be teaching us. So he says, okay, I'll make you a deal. You can interrogate me under the following terms. If you win me over, you can do whatever you want with me, as if you can kill me. You can do whatever you'd like. But if I win over you, you need to eat bread with me on my ship, okay? Unfortunately, we're not going to get to the very end of the story. This is a really long Gemara of what the whole plan was with the ship and why he was taking him up. He wanted to get these wise men onto the ship. For that, you're going to have to go look on yourself, Bechoros 8b, to look through the entire thing. It's an amazing read, let me tell you, an amazing read. Okay, so they agree to the terms and they start a conversation. And there's a lot of back and forths, and we're going to choose a couple of them, and you'll see that they don't make any sense. And it is, now, this Gemara is in the category of a passage that is possible to have happened. Okay, we have not said anything yet that's an impossibility. That means there's no reason to believe that this is allegorical, that it's a metaphor, that it's a parable. There's no reason to believe that this didn't actually happen. So let's take it for granted that this story happened, but it doesn't seem to be teaching us much. So we're going to get into an encrypted message in every single part of the conversation between these wise Greeks and Rabbi Yeshua. And we'll get into, us together now, we're going to get into 3 back and forths if we have time, but really there was actually about 15 or more that are recorded here in this Gemara. All right, so what do the wise men say? If a man goes and asks the hand of a woman in marriage and she declines, she, or really her family, says, we're not interested in a match with you, our daughter is not for you, and no deal. Why should he see fit? I'm going to read literal because I just want to read the literal text before we get into it. I'm reading from the Art Scroll. Why should he see fit to go where the people are of a higher social status than the first women and seek one of their daughters? If he was found unworthy of the first, he is surely unworthy of the second. Okay, so just on a literal sense, if the girl and her family refused the marriage and she was from a simple family, would you then go to the king and say, I want to marry your daughter, I want to marry the princess? No, that wouldn't make sense. Okay, that was asked as a question. What's the meaning behind this question? Like, this doesn't seem to make so much sense. Yeah, there's nothing wrong with what I just said. It's just an odd question for the wisest men of the generation to be asking Rabbi Yeshua. If the girl refuses, does it make sense to go to a family of a higher social status? All right, let's take it for now. What does Rabbi Yeshua say? In response, he took a pin and he stuck it on the lower part of the wall, right here in this chamber where they all are in. But the pin did not enter. There was no crack in the wall that he could have lodged the pin into. He raised the arm up higher and he stuck it into the higher part of the wall where there was a crack, and he was able to stick it in there. And Rabbi Yeshua said, this man too, despite his rejection by the first family, may chance to find among the second family a woman destined for him. Just as a pin may penetrate only where there is a crack to receive it, regardless of how high the crack is on the wall, so may a man find his mate in a woman predisposed to him by circumstance, regardless of her social status. Okay, so that's what he said back. This pin didn't enter the bottom, but it could still enter the top of the wall where in a place where it is fitting for it to go, because there's a crack in the wall. So too, just because a man didn't find his wife in a family of a lower social status doesn't mean that his bashert, his predestined spouse, is not in a family of royalty or of a higher social status. So not much here on a surface level. So there's a couple of opinions of what is the encrypted message here. And that's what we're here to tackle. Okay, so there's two opinions here. One is from the Maharal and one is from the Gra, the Vilna Gaon. First one from the Maharal. This riddle, says the Maharal, was actually a parable that concealed an attack on the Jewish belief in the afterlife. Man in the parable, who's seeking a woman, a wife, represents the Jewish people. The first and second women are respectively our present world. That means the first woman who rejected him is this world, planet Earth. And the second one represents the world to come. Surely the world we're in now is a way lower level than the world to come. If the Jewish people, says the wise men of Greek, the message they were really telling Rabbi Yeshua, if the Jewish people are unfit for the present world, when I say unfit, I mean they are hated, they are persecuted, they are spit on around the world, they're not accepted as a people of the world and planet Earth, then why would you think that the Jewish people are going to receive something big in the world to come? That was the message that the Greeks were given. That's what they were telling Rabbi Yeshua. You Jews have nothing now in this world. You think you're going to have something in the next world? So what was Rabbi Yeshua's response about putting the pin in the wall? He says, the present plight of the Jews, the fact that we're in the situation we're in exile, does not result from any fundamental issue Rather, it indicates a mismatch between Israel's essentially spiritual character, the material of the temporary world we're in. However, the world to come is a fitting match for the Jewish people, and that's why they will achieve everlasting success in the next world. So it doesn't matter that the pin's not fitting in this part of the wall right here, because it's a mismatch. There's no hole in the wall to receive the pin, but you put it up there it could already fit. So too, the Jewish people may not be considered successful in this world, but certainly in the next world they will be. And then we have one from the Gra. The Gra says that the man is Hashem and the second woman is the Jewish people. The Torah often compares the bond between Hashem and the Jewish people to the bond of a husband and wife. The Gemara says in Avodah Zarah that before the Jews received the Torah at Sinai, Hashem offered the Torah to all of the nations of the world who refused it. If the Gentiles refused to enter a covenant with Hashem and become his bride, why did Hashem then approach Israel in the expectation that they would accept? Surely not because they were greater people, but rather because they're lower people. This is the assumption that the wise men of Greek made. And the response back was that, one second, this was the Marsha. Okay, that the spike, in Rabbi Yeshua's rebuttal, this pin alluded to the Torah, which is the peg upon which the world stands. The world hangs on the Torah, so to speak. To be useful, a peg needs to be attached high on the wall. Similarly, the Torah needed to be attached to a people whose aspirations were directed heavenward, towards Hashem, rather than the nations who are rooted in materialism. So they basically, what the response was, is that no, the nations of the world didn't take the Torah because they're on a lower level of the wall, rooted in physicality, but the Jewish people who are facing their eyes heavenward are worthy of being receivers for the Jewish people. Okay, with a couple more minutes, I want to try to get into one or two more. Okay, the next question that the wise men of Greece asked Rabbi Yeshua, if a man lent money and was eventually forced to foreclose, he didn't get the borrower defaulted, right? The bank takes back the house, the borrower wasn't able to pay back. Why should he see fit to lend once more? Surely his experience would have taught him to avoid making the mistake of giving somebody a loan. So if you give somebody a loan and they don't pay it back, shouldn't you learn your lesson and not give somebody another loan? That was the question, right? Interesting question. What's Rabbi Yeshua's answer? He says, a man went to the marsh and cut a bundle of reeds, and he tried putting it on his shoulder, and he wasn't able to. So what did he do? Instead of giving up and stopping to cut the reeds, he takes a second bundle. He wasn't able to, meaning it was too heavy. So he takes a second bundle and he puts it on top of the first one and then waits until he'll find a man who might come by and be able to help him lift both of them. So he's dependent on the assistance of somebody else to help him lift it. He's being wise to prepare to make the most of the help that's going to come by having an additional bundle ready on top of it so that they could both lift it together. So similarly, if you default on a loan, instead of stopping to lend out money, you're just going to seek a more reliable borrower to lend money to and profit from so that you can repay your previous loan. On the contrary, such an investor, such a bank, a lender, when a bank gets a foreclosure on a loan or a house or something, let's say not a house, let's say it's a loan and the bank never gets its money back. Does the bank say, Chase Bank, I'm out, we're done with this? This is not our field? No way. It goes and tries harder to lend out more money, hoping it'll get more people who will repay the loan and be able to reclaim those losses. So the Maral says this was a challenge to the faith of the Jewish people. He says, you Jews maintain that Hashem rescued you from slavery in Egypt and gave you the land of Israel, for which you are obligated to acknowledge Hashem's goodness and Hashem's grace to you and serve Hashem. But instead of acknowledging that, instead of paying back your debt, you're sinning. The Jewish people sin and have sinned throughout all generations and worshiped idols and all kinds of terrible things. And that's why Hashem had to kick you out of Israel and destroy the temple. Do you really think that Hashem is going to give you another chance? You defaulted. You didn't pay. You didn't pay up. Hashem took you out of Egypt. You had a debt to pay. You had to serve Hashem. You didn't. Hashem kicked you out. You think he's going to try to come take you back? That doesn't make sense. And the answer that Rabbi Yeshua says about the man helping with the second bundle, he says, one second. According to the Gra, the original loan was the Torah. More specifically, the laws of the Torah, which are of biblical nature from the Torah. This is the way of the Gra. Actually, I'm sorry. I need to answer the Maral first. The Maral said that the question was that why should Hashem take you again if he evicted you from Israel? Why should he invest in you again? And to that, they said, the Greeks were looking at the Jewish people as one entity. For all generations, there's the Jewish people from year whatever, from the times of the Torah until now. So then it makes sense. You're not going to give the same borrower another loan who defaulted on his loan. That's fair game. If somebody defaults on a Chase credit card, it's fair to say that Chase might not give him another credit card. But the mistake that they made is that the later generations of the Jewish people are considered another man. This is what Rabbi Yeshua was saying with the analogy of another man coming to help with the bundles. It's another man, distinct from the first. And therefore, we could have merits that previous generations actually did not have. And that's why Hashem will redeem us from this gullus, from this exile, because we will build up enough merits to be able to do that, even though previous generations did not. Okay, we kind of have to go, but there's more to this. This is such good stuff, and there's so much more. But I think we have to stop for today. I want to take a minute or two if anybody has questions. I hope next week we're gonna get to a couple of more quotes from this Gemara, and then we're gonna get back to understanding the logic behind all of this. We're gonna talk about possibilities for stories that are impossible to have happened, because today we're mostly focusing on things that are possible, but just finding the deeper meaning behind it. So there's plenty much more. Come back next week and we'll continue the conversation. If anybody has questions, I have a minute or two now.
Nope.
Did this actually happen then?
Yeah, so the consensus is that this is a story that there's no reason to say did not happen. Nothing impossible happened in the story. And therefore, yes, the story happened, but the Gemara is not teaching it to us just for the sake of the story. You know, it's not just for the sake of the story, but rather it was a much deeper conversation that was really happening between Rabbi Yeshua and these wise men. By the way, maybe I don't know if I make that clear. We are not coming along thousands of years after the story and saying in the conversation between the wise men of Greece and Rabbi Yeshua, we can learn a deeper encrypted conversation. We are saying that's what they intended. These were the wisest people of the planet having a conversation with each other. It wasn't as silly as it sounds, but rather something way deeper happened. And in this deeper conversation, there's a lot we can learn. The messages that I told you are important concepts and basic ideas of the Jewish people and exile and our merits, etc. So that's why it's in the Talmud. Any other quick comments or questions?
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Next week,
Thank
same
you. It was
time.
wonderful as usual.
Looking forward. See you, everybody. Have a great
Have
week.
a great night. Have a great night. Thank you.
What time is your